What if you grew up in a belief system that told you everything around you was an illusion? What if you were told everything that happened to you, from being sick to stubbing a toe to being bullied at school, was your fault for not knowing the truth? What if you were denied even the most basic health care, from pain pills to checkups to vaccinations? How do you unravel yourself from this belief system? And what happens when you do? My name is Hillary Alexander, and this is Leaving Christian Science. I'm Hillary Alexander, and this is the very first episode of Leaving Christian Science. I grew up in this religion. I was born into it and left very slowly over several decades. And it's never entirely left me, this experience of growing up in a high control group, or as some may call a cult. I personally call it a cult. I know there's a lot of different opinions about that. But there are aspects of it that stay with you. And I've become really fascinated by other groups like this, and finding the similarities has been really fascinating for me, listening to podcasts from ex-Mormons, ex-Jehovah's Witness, ex-Scientology, just seeing how the survivors of these groups have so many things in common and go through so many similar struggles. And I found that there wasn't a whole lot of resource for ex-Christian scientists, especially not ones that just leave faith systems entirely and don't adopt another system. So I wanted to put this out there as sort of a resource for anyone who might be curious about it, or who's in it and thinking about getting out, or having doubts, or left and is feeling guilty, or left and is feeling like they're crazy or no one could possibly understand. We definitely understand. So let's hear some ex-Christian Science stories. I'm going to start with my sister Madeleine. Hi. Who shared our experience of growing up in Christian Science. We're going to talk about what a childhood in Christian Science is like, what it's like coming out of it, what kind of repercussions there are later in life, and then also what happens with your aging parents as they, try to navigate their later years with no medical intervention, which is something that people, ex-Christian Scientists or Christian Scientists our age, definitely all have in common, which is what happens when things start to fall apart on you and you can't see a doctor. What happens? So this is Madeleine. Madeleine is 10 years older than me. So she has the experience of being in our family before Christian Science was introduced. I think it's pretty rare to have adult converts. I would say most of the Christian Scientists we know are like multi-generational, wouldn't you say?
For sure. Yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah, so we don't have, grandparents and great-grandparents. It was our mother that found Christian Science when she was pregnant with me. So Madeleine was, 9, 10 years old at the time. And I was born into it, unfortunately. But our mother, had a long history of getting herself involved with these sort of faith-based groups. And Christian Science just happened to be the one that, for whatever reason, stuck. So, Madeleine, why don't you tell us a little bit about life with our mother before Christian Science? What was she into? What were you doing?
Again, it's just snippets, because it's, I was only 10, so you know how that is. You don't really get a whole linear view. But the one I remember the most was macrobiotics, which wasn't religion. Well, maybe it was religion, actually. And she got into that, I would probably from about age 4 to 7-ish or something like that. We were into that.
Yeah.
For
so
those
we're talking mid-60s for anyone who's
for sure, the whole hippie thing and the whole deal.
It was a thing.
And for those who don't know what macrobiotics is, I think most do because of Erewhon and those places. But no sugar, it's all diet, no sugar, all whole grains, no meat or even maybe fish.
I think there was fish. Yeah, no meat. It was a very Japanese sort of base.
It was.
So there's a lot of seaweed, brown rice, vegetables.
Yeah. And too much salt. And in the later years, especially the family who founded it, the Michio Kushi.
Yeah.
all ended up with horrible gastrointestinal stuff because of,
Interesting.
yeah, in fact, I think one of the daughters died from stomach cancer anyway. Oy. So yeah, so we were into macrobiotics for quite a number of years, which was sort of, I think, a precursor to going deeper into the crazy, you know. I remember we lived in Mexico at the time, and it was my maybe 5th or 6th birthday. And you know, kids are all excited about their birthday cakes, right? And she created this like peanut whole wheat heart-shaped cake that weighed like 30 pounds, and she decorated it with green grapes. And it was just such a womp womp moment, you know.
Well, there's an amazing picture of you in front of this cake, which
Yes,
we
I
need to
wish I had
frame
it,
somewhere.
but you can
I mean,
only
one
imagine.
thing
Yeah.
I have some of the macrobiotic cookbooks still.
Yeah.
And one thing I find really interesting, and that's such a thread through this and Christian Science and so many other belief systems, is it's all about control.
Yes.
And it's all about denial of pleasures as some kind of odd penance or punishment in a way. Not that that was a macrobiotic thing, but like there's, I don't know if you remember this in macrobiotics, there's like all these different levels of what you eat. And like you become more pure or more enlightened as you eat fewer things.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah,
Very
so
little
finally, like,
Scientology sort of
yeah,
thing, right?
level 7 is just brown rice.
Oh my God.
And you're supposed to like have some sort of enlightenment from that you become so pure that you can exist only on brown rice. And I remember our mother talking about it in these sort of like reverent tones, like I made level 7 once and I just felt totally high. And it's like that all these groups have the same thing of like doing these physiological things to yourself and yet thinking it's magical when it's really just a bodily function or a brain function.
Right.
You know, like
Right.
meditation is all about shutting down external stimuli to create a certain physiological response in your brain that's very pleasurable. There's nothing like magical about it.
Nothing magical.
You know, and I don't
Nothing.
think our mother ever really grasped that. And a lot of people still don't, of there's nothing magical about any of these things.
Right.
It's all just a way of manipulating your body and your brain function to achieve a result.
Right.
You know, but
Right.
obviously many of these things are harmful. You know, just eating brown rice is extremely harmful.
Ridiculous. And then the whole, remember if you had to chew each mouthful like 50 times in order to.
Yeah, and you can't drink water that's either too hot or too cold. It has to be room temperature. I mean, there's a million rules of how to cut vegetables to be in harmony with the universe.
Yeah.
You know,
and then to point to the hypocrisy of macrobiotics, I remember once, and she was with me, this was after we left, I think. We saw Michio Kushi going into a Dunkin' Donuts. We were in the parking lot. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Did you know that? You didn't know that? Yeah.
Oh my God.
There you go. In a nutshell. Yeah.
So our mother, you know, drags you all over South America, basically, in your childhood. Being macrobiotic, I think at one point she did a macrobiotic cooking show in Brazil. Is that?
She did. She was really good.
My father, you know, she had divorced your dad, met my father in Brazil through macrobiotics, interestingly. And then they came back to the United States, got married, and got pregnant with me. And, you know, the apocryphal story of how Christian Science came into our lives was that she found it at a bookmobile. That sound familiar?
Yes.
Now, I had always thought that Christian Scientists did not proselytize, and that was something I was sort of oddly proud of. Like, well, we don't, you know, ring doorbells and we don't put literature out. People just find us because it's so awesome, you know. But that's the story she told, was that there was a bookmobile, and I don't know if it was a Christian Science bookmobile or just a book van that had books in it. I happened to find.
I think it was specifically CS, which they probably did away with at some point and realized it was not a good fit for the whole proselytizing narrative.
So, you know, that's the story of how this came into our lives, is that she found probably Science and Health.
For sure.
And just for some bizarre reason was like, this is it.
Yeah.
I'm sold. This is the thing. And somehow managed to get my father, her sister, her sister's husband, and consequently their two kids,
Yeah.
into this bizarre, already dying, like Victorian mystical cult.
Yeah.
And they all bought it. And everyone was just like full in, which is
Yeah.
still really difficult for me to wrap my brain around. That all of these people were like, let's do this.
Let's do this. Well, part of that is our mother was very, you know,
Persuasive.
yeah, I was going to say pushy, but persuasive.
Pushy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because she had a really strong personality, and she just had her way. Yeah. Don't you
Yeah.
think it was part of it?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And the
Yeah.
family dynamics between her and her sister and all that was, definitely played into that. So that was how it began. And then when she and my father got divorced, she, was a struggling single mom. I think one of the first jobs she had was probably, didn't she do security at the church center in
She
Boston?
did.
Yeah.
Yeah, she did.
And then
And other things too. Like
she did a lot of
so
sort
many
of
things.
odd jobs at the church. We were living in Boston at the time.
Yeah.
And so she probably lived it more intensely than we did, in the sense that it was her living, it was her faith, it was, we at least got to like go to regular school and have like non-CS
Yeah.
interactions with people.
I
But
mean, I
she
think the
was,
only thing that we were involved with was Sunday school, and for you, the children's room, which is just such a creepy thing to say, but the children's room.
I don't remember being called that, but
Yeah.
oddly, I do have positive memories of
Yeah.
the church center, yeah, in
Yeah.
Boston. For those of you who don't know,
Yeah.
Christian Science is based out of Boston. The mother church is there, and there's this giant church center that was built, first in the late 1800s, and then I think built upon up into the 70s, probably.
Mm-hmm.
So, we were in it, like we were in the belly of the beast, as it were, in Boston, going to the annual meetings, going to church Sundays and Wednesdays. And then later, when we moved to New York, the churches we attended in New York City were, these giant mausoleums built probably in the 1870s and 1880s that were meant to seat thousands of people. And by the 80s, the congregations were down to, 10, 20 people, mostly little old ladies,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember as a child, and you'll have to tell me if you had this experience too, of going to Sunday school and being either like the only kid there or being one of two or three. And sort of this, I remember the hungry look of the ushers, oh, a new child, and just even then, even as like a 9, 10-year-old girl, I remember being extremely creeped out.
Yeah. Yeah.
By these sad churches with sort of these droning, lugubrious organs and all these little old people, and everybody's friendly. I mean, I'm not going to say they're not
Everybody's
friendly,
friendly. Yeah.
but there was always this sense of we were seeing the depressing end of something.
Yes.
It didn't feel vibrant. It didn't feel like
No.
a happy,
Funereal
welcoming place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think is the appeal of a lot of these mega churches and sort of younger churches. It's like, oh, it's people in jeans, and they listen to music, and it's hot, it's hip and happening, and
Yeah.
the polar opposite of our experience.
Yeah. Very stodgy, very old feeling, and also a lot of people that looked unwell for obvious reasons because they'd never been to a doctor. You'd have some guy sitting there that had like a thing hanging off his neck, and just really upsetting images,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you remember early experiences of starting to go to churches? Do you remember what it was like having this introduced into our lives, like reading the lesson and stuff like that? Do you have any memories of that time?
Again, snippets. Most of the early memories were when we lived on the Jamaica Way in Jamaica Plains. You were really, really young.
Yeah.
And I remember one incident where I had cut my finger somehow. I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables, and I cut into my ring finger on my right hand. And you don't call a doctor. And she called a practitioner, and of course you pray about it and all this nonsense that maybe you can get into later if you want, but let me move on from that. Okay, so the practitioner was called, and then we went to the Wednesday evening testimony meeting, and my finger was better because it
Fingers
gets
get
better. And my mother looked down at my finger and she was just like, oh my God, you've been healed and it's so wonderful. And she got up and told a testimony about it. And it was, even then, it was cringy for me at the age of whatever I was, 11 or 12. It felt there a disconnect. You know, I wasn't sure what
Yeah.
it was, but it just didn't feel right. I was like, but maybe it just got better, you know? And then there was another incident where she was in the kitchen fighting with your father, unfortunately, and a pan of boiling water fell on her thigh. Do you remember that?
I remember being told about it.
Yeah. And again, another situation where she called a practitioner and then, you know, she went and had it bandaged at the Benevolent Association, one of
Okay.
the, I guess, old folks' homes, what do we call them in normal English? I don't know.
Yeah, probably like a senior care center or something,
Right,
you know.
right. Where you were allowed to be tended by a Christian Science nurse, and she got bandaged or whatever. And it took a long time to heal, but when it finally did, she was like, "Oh my God, it's healed. It's all that." It just, the lunacy of it. Anyway,
But you
so
were able to see that, like you were able to see that this was not quite right.
particularly with my finger, that was the biggie because, you know, it just got better.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just
See,
got
I
better.
didn't have that. And maybe it's something of being born into it. I didn't have any reference point.
Yeah,
For
you
me,
were
all
so
of
much
these things,
younger.
those little incidents, you know, all throughout our childhoods of these minor injuries and illnesses and things, they were real healings, you know.
Mm,
To me, they were very real because, again, as a Christian Scientist, you're not taught how the body works. You're not taught about what a normal healing time actually is.
right, right.
So it's set up in such a way that anything is a healing, even, you know, and they manage to do the mental gymnastics that even when something isn't healed, which a lot of times things aren't if they're severe enough,
Mhm.
that, oh, it's not really about that.
Oh boy,
You know, it's
that's a favorite. Yep,
we're moving past the physical. This is really
that's
a
right.
spiritual problem that we're attacking, you
That's
know.
right.
One
That's right.
once they have to recognize that the so-called healing isn't happening, it's like, well, it's not about that anyway. It's about, I mean, what would they call it? Like spiritual awakening or ascension or some generic term.
Yeah, I can't remember. So much of it is fuzzy, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, yeah, when you get to the grand excuse, right, that it's something else. It's not about the physical healing. She did that so much,
Yeah.
and it was heartbreaking, honestly.
Yeah.
It really was, especially when you get into like the serious illnesses, you know.
Yeah. But I
Um,
remember being young and happily getting up to give testimonies, you know, about my parakeet being healed of some illness or, you know, just little funny kid things. And everyone was always
right,
delighted by it, of course, because you're a cute little kid.
right.
And I remember that feeling of knowing that she would be so pleased,
Mm,
you know?
that you got up and yeah,
Yeah. And that the other adults there would be so delighted.
yeah.
And and it felt real. So it didn't feel performative, even though it sort of was, because it was a
Mm,
sense of like, oh, I'm going to perform this for these adults and they're going to pat my head and tell me how good I am,
mm,
you know? And that
yeah,
was a way, I mean, all children develop ways to get their parents' approval, obviously. It's
sure.
a normal thing. And I
Yeah,
think probably for us going along with this
yeah,
and performing it was a big part of getting love from her,
absolutely.
you know?
And just as an aside, I mean, I think all kids think that their parents are perfect or
Yeah.
want to think that they're
And
perfect.
smart.
But I really did. I thought that, you know, she was the be all end all, and she really was just on top of it as a human,
Yeah.
you know. Took a long time to unravel that. So yeah, you just figure that her word is gospel, and therefore this CS business is it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she rode through the world with such confidence
She did.
which really masked a deep, intense insecurity. Of course, we know that now. But yeah, it was very difficult to oppose her.
Very difficult. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm raising two kids now that don't have any belief system, and you know, we'll talk about this stuff a lot because I find it interesting, and I want them to know my history, and I want them to understand how the world works, you know, and how our
Yeah.
brains work. And
Yeah.
they'll ask me, why do people believe these things? Because some of them are just so ridiculous. They just can't believe
Mhm.
it. And I
Mm.
always say, well, look, when everyone around you and people that are smart and that you trust tell you that something is, you believe it,
Yeah.
you know, especially when it's people that you really look up to and trust, like your parents or a teacher or an adult that seems to really have it together. It's natural. It's, you know, we can't fault ourselves for
No,
falling for this thing because the people that we trusted and thought were smart told us this is true,
that's right.
you
Yeah.
know. And also, I mean, there's so many things about groups like this, especially Christian Science, which again, you know, is so small and so sort of beleaguered.
Yeah. That's such a
It's,
good description.
you know,
It
it's,
is.
you develop this sort of like us against the world mentality, which causes you
Mm.
to double down even further into it.
Yeah.
That because it becomes your identity. I mean, even now, like being an ex-Christian Scientist is one of the things that makes up my identity, like it or not.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
spent, you know, what, 30 years in this thing,
Yeah.
and it influenced my decision making and my my
Yeah.
life and my mentality for most of my life. I mean, how can I pretend it wasn't there, you know?
Yeah.
So it becomes your identity, which is another reason to sort of double down into it. It's like you're not attacking that thing, you're attacking me.
Hmm.
This is
That's right.
me,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
and stuff still lingers, you know, it
Yeah.
still lingers.
Yeah.
I was always, and this was probably as I got into my late teens, early 20s. I was always embarrassed by it. I never told any of my friends.
Oh, wow.
Um, one friend came to visit me when we were living on the Lower East Side, and she saw the Bible by my bedstand, and she said, "Oh my God, you read the scripture?" And I can't remember what I did, but I quickly just looked like hid it away. Yeah, I was always embarrassed by it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
Yeah, never told
Yeah.
it.
It's so interesting that you had a different feeling about it. I'm not going to say was, it was something I talked about a lot with people, but I didn't hide it. And I
Mm.
wasn't embarrassed by it, I don't think. Yeah.
I think for me, it was because we didn't go to doctors, and all my friends went to doctors. So I would make up stories about going to the doctor, and I mean,
Yeah. Oh, funny.
I created a whole thing.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow. Yeah.
yeah. I never told you.
No.
No, that's why this is so interesting, because we can. There's stuff that we didn't know. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely got a lot of pushback, especially from boyfriends as I got older. You know,
Oh, I bet.
they push back hard, you
Yeah.
know, and and of course it just at that age, we're talking like teens, early 20s, you know, made me just double down harder. But of course, like they were right about everything. They were right about everything. I remember this one guy told me, Hillary, you're so smart.
Mm.
How can you believe this? How can you believe this?
Yeah.
And my reaction at the time was just to be like really defensive and angry and lay off, you know, kind of thing. Um, but he was right. They were all right. All the people that questioned me throughout my youth,
Yeah.
they were right.
And I don't know how family did it. I mean, you know, my father, my stepmother, my other half sister, they all thought it was cuckoo, but they somehow, I don't know how they did it.
Yeah, our grandparents, they all just
Oh
kind
my
of like
God, right. The
stood by.
grandparents.
And
Yeah.
you know, the
Just,
most shocking thing I heard, I just still like, part of me can't believe this was true, but I remember our aunt telling us that our grandmother, who obviously was not Christian Science, said to her, well, at least Amy is our mother, at least Amy is looking after her daughter's spiritual needs.
really?
Yeah.
Right?
I remember our aunt telling us that our
Wow.
grandmother was somehow like loved the idea or just was like behind it in a way that, well, at least we're growing up in something.
That's so funny because the only time she ever went to church was for a funeral,
Yeah,
basically.
because she wasn't religious.
At
Like, what?
all.
Where did that come from? It's just
I don't
odd.
know.
I,
That's
I
so
can
odd.
only guess that most of these people must not have really known what Christian Science was about.
Right.
Maybe they thought it was Scientology like everyone else.
Oh,
But
that's funny. That's
yeah,
funny.
so I was very proud of it, and I sort of wore it as a badge of honor, like, oh, I'm in this like odd little sect,
Mm,
but I'm super into it and I'm super devout. And I mean, I was a true believer, you know. I'm not
yeah.
gonna ever say that as much as I had doubts here and there, I was super into it.
Uh-huh. I can't remember when I became super into it because I was. I think it was probably in my late 20s, early 30s. Um, when there was a click from, I know what it was, which of course turned out to be chronic anxiety. But I thought that I had developed a heart problem. You remember all this, right? Talk about it
Yeah.
all the time. Beating heart, shortness of breath, whatever. And of course, I couldn't go to a doctor to find out what it was. So I really delved into the books and to try to make some connection, like what was I doing wrong? All right, our favorite thing. What was I doing wrong that created this heart problem? Um, and of course, at that point, our mother also was having some really physical stuff going on, right? I can't remember even where it started, but it was like a whole thing with her bladder and whatever. So she was diving deep too. Yeah, and then sorry, I lost my train of thought. Oh, so that's when I really started to study hard, and of course nothing was getting better, you know. And well, I'm jumping ahead because you might want to talk about when when it clicked for you and when you left, because that sort of carries on to where I was with Amy at that point, maybe. I don't want to jump too far ahead, of our story.
Yeah. So we're
Yeah.
probably getting into like the 2000s, right?
Yeah, something
Early
like that.
2000s. So we're
Yeah.
talking the last 20 years or so.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, for me, the unraveling of Christian Science was a very slow process.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I can say it started when I was around 12, when I absolutely refused to go to Sunday school anymore. I don't know if you remember this.
I kind of do,
Yeah, and it wasn't that
yeah.
I didn't want to go to church. I was still all in, but
Mm,
I just thought the Sunday school was stupid and infantilizing, and I wanted to sit in the church with the adults, you know.
mhm.
So and somehow our mother's friend got involved in this. I think she must have been a Sunday school teacher or something, and she was very opposed to me not going to Sunday school anymore. And and we kind of got into it. You know, this is me, a 12-year-old with this adult. And I finally just said, well, I just don't think it's God's will that I go to Sunday school anymore. Because I was just trying to find some language that she would accept.
Right,
She would
right,
just let me stop going to Sunday school.
right.
And she said, and well, whose will do you think it is? And I said, yours.
I do remember that. Girl, amazing.
And somehow, I mean, thankfully, our mother supported me in this.
Yeah,
You know, she did.
yeah.
And so I only went to church after that. But the beginnings were there. You know, I kept diaries my entire childhood. I still have them all.
Mhm.
And I remember distinctly writing, I called it the question. Like I'm still wrestling with the question. And for me, the question was, why do we have to fight so hard and study
Mm.
so hard to know the unrealness of something if it's not real?
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, why are we spending all this time and energy? Because Christian Science, like a lot of these groups, it's if you do all of the things you're supposed to do, is a real time suck.
Oh,
You know,
that's
you're reading
unbelievable.
this lesson every morning, and
Yeah.
that takes a good like half hour, 45 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
And I read this fucking thing every day before school, got up
And
extra
if
early.
if you're marking the books, that's another.
Yeah, every
course.
Sunday night you're marking your books with the little blue, thing and the little chamois and all that. And then you're going to church on Wednesdays and Sundays. And then there's all this other crap. There's lectures, there's pamphlets. I had a whole bag full of pamphlets that I would read and all the other literature. And you're supposed to just spend so much time studying. And it's all repetitive and it's all word salad and it's all utterly meaningless, actually, when you read it with a clear mind, as I've done since, I've revisited Science and Health years ago.
Have you?
It's still like a long time since I'd read it.
Yeah.
And it was just gobbledygook. Complete nonsense.
Yeah.
It was like reading something from a language that you spoke when you were a kid that you don't speak anymore. And trying to make sense of it and just being like, I can't even read this. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And that's what it was. But as a Christian Scientist, again, if you're doing all of the things that you're supposed to be doing, you're just in this endless loop of battling, these like forces that are coming to get you.
Yes, the forces. Yeah,
because we have
protective work every morning.
Yeah, we have to do our protective work.
Right.
And yet the thing that we're trying to protect ourselves from is not actually real.
What a colossal waste of time.
Colossal waste of time and a mind fuck.
Completely.
And the phrase that you and I use all the time, which is you still have to pick up your dry cleaning. It's that was the second part of the question was, so you're telling me that none of these negative things in our human lives are real, but we still have to experience them.
That's right.
We still have to go through it. We still have to get up every day and be cold and go to a school that we don't want to go to and be bullied if that's happening or whatever. You still have to have all these like negative experiences.
Yeah.
You still have to live it. And it feels super real.
And I think that the final frontier was that you would ascend or something.
There was this sort of like amorphous like concept of what the end thing is. It wasn't like, because obviously you don't actually die because you don't have a physical body and there is no mortal mind and all this crap. But something does happen.
Right.
Like there is like an end game to all of this. And it was sort of like, well, you ascend. It's like, well, what's that? What do you mean you ascend? Are we talking about the rapture? Like, what is this?
Well, I think there were stories about how Mary Baker Eddy, she was the discoverer and founder, that she ascended.
Right.
And I guess that means, like those paintings you see of Jesus going up into heaven. Is that what ascend? I'm not sure.
Yeah, we're not really sure. I remember asking my mother once, like, do we believe in reincarnation? And she said, well, we don't believe in carnation. We can't believe in reincarnation. And that was always the answer to every question, was like, well, it's not real. So.
Right.
And there's a term I've learned recently in the cultiverse that I inhabit most of my days. I listen to 1,000 cult podcasts every day. And one of my favorite terms I've learned from that is the thought-stopping cliche. It's when you ask a question, wanting an answer, and you get just some like pat.
That's right.
Yeah. Like simply it would be like, well, it is what it is. That would be a way to like stop someone and not continue the conversation and not really answer them. And so you're just kind of like, okay.
Right.
So every question I asked our mother about like, what do we believe? And what about this? And what about this was always answered with this sort of, like we don't believe in carnation, so we can't believe in this. Well, it's not really real. So blah, 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 blah. And you just kind of go, okay. Because how do you argue against it's not real? You know what I mean? It's kind of like trying to prove that Santa Claus doesn't exist. Like you can't prove a negative. It's sort of like either prove he does exist by presenting him, but the other side that says he's not real, well, we have no proof that he's not real. He could be real. You know what I mean? So you're just stuck in this netherworld of negatives, like endlessly swirling.
Yeah.
And that drove me nuts because at the same time we had to actually live these so-called material lives, and they sure felt fucking real.
That's
You
right.
know, when you
That's
cut
right.
yourself, it feels really real. When you're hurt, when you have a broken heart over a relationship, it feels real.
It feels real. Yeah.
And
And there was
unfortunately,
no room for those human feelings, which
no.
was the most destructive, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's one point I'd like to get out to our listeners is, we were lucky in that we were healthy.
Thank God.
We didn't have chronic illnesses. We weren't diabetic. We didn't,
Yeah.
pick up terrible viruses that,
Yeah. No
I mean,
serious accidents, really.
yeah, no accidents. I mean, we survived our Christian Science childhoods by pure luck that we
Right.
just managed to stay relatively healthy and just have sort of normal childhood ailments.
Yeah.
But so for us, the medical neglect wasn't a huge issue. It was more the emotional
That's right.
neglect. And, I'd like to immediately stop down the thought of like, well, that was just your mother.
Yeah.
Because yes and no. Like, yes,
Partially, but no. Yeah.
we, like everyone our age, suffered from 1960s and 70s parenting or lack thereof.
Like
It was
right.
definitely normal in that respect, like a certain amount of neglect we experienced. Pretty much everyone our age did. So, I'm not going to point to that, but the constant stamping down of any negative emotions or any reactions to anything, and then backing it up with this religion that seemed like this giant, powerful thing of, everything is always your fault.
Oh,
If you get sick, if you get injured, if you have a problem with another person, it's always something that you did.
always.
And that's incredibly damaging
Yes.
to children.
Yes.
I mean, it's damaging to adults, but imagine
Yes.
spending your entire childhood every time you go to your mother for comfort over anything, over, you stubbed your toe or somebody was mean to you at school,
Yeah.
and receiving no comfort and just being
That's right.
told,
Yeah.
well, what did you do?
Yeah. It was something in your thinking. Remember that
Something in
one?
your thinking, or you hadn't tried hard enough, or you weren't knowing the truth enough, and sort of
Right.
being sent off into a corner with a book written in the 1870s,
Oh,
like a crazy person.
yeah.
I mean, that's what I remember. That's what I
Oh,
remember from my Christian Science childhood is
yeah.
countless hours poring over the Bible and science and health, like desperately looking for some comfort that we never got. I'll never forget. I had all the like kids books, right?
Yeah.
And I was getting rid of them. And a friend of mine happened to be over at the time, and I was going through the books and getting them ready to be thrown out or given away or whatever. And I looked at her and I said, it's kind of hard for me to let go of these because I got so much comfort from them. And she said, well, if you had a mother that was comforting, you wouldn't have needed to turn to books for comfort.
Oh, so those books were comforting to you,
Yeah.
Travis Talks to God and all those books. Interesting.
Well, they were all I had.
I was older, so I don't have any
Yeah.
connection to those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they were all I had. Those were the thing that were given to me in a time of crisis.
Hey,
I
yeah.
mean, it's really heartbreaking. Like
It is.
I look at that little girl, and I've done all the inner child work. So I feel, like I've processed.
Yes.
But I just want to give her a big hug and just be like, it wasn't your fault.
That's
You
right.
didn't deserve that. All those things that I desperately needed to hear as this little child just trying to navigate the difficulties of growing up and having this extra weight of, a non-comforting mother.
Yeah.
And a religion that, was so deeply ingrained in my brain that also told me that everything was my fault and I wasn't trying hard enough.
And the beauty of that is now you get to channel all that into your beautiful voice.
Yeah.
That must be so gratifying to be able to.
I mean, talk about healing. Like that's really,
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it was interesting to watch these boys when they were little and see how they operated as little toddlers, where they get hurt. And even if it's not like a bad hurt, even just a little thing, they want you to see it.
That's right.
They immediately come to you and go, look, And how you react to that sets the stage.
That's the stage.
You know,
Yeah.
so if you kiss their boo-boo and say, oh, I'm sorry that happened, are you okay? They're
Yeah.
like instantly better and they just run
That's
off
it.
and play.
A little hug and a kiss. You
Yeah.
don't have to read a stupid book.
But they want acknowledgement. It's not even
Yeah.
about it hurts, I need it to stop hurting. It's about I want you to acknowledge this.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fascinating to watch. I was like, wow, look at that.
Yeah, it's
You
so
know,
cool.
it was
So cool.
interesting because I was like, I was thinking of all the times I must have done that. And you
And
know,
got nothing but
got nothing, but
here's a
it's not
book.
real.
Oh,
You know, I mean, here,
I didn't experience any of that because I was a little bit older, you know.
yeah,
I was in, you know, late teens, early 20s when you were going through all that stuff. And
yeah,
I think I was out skiing in Aspen and living the wild life. Yeah, that was when I dropped it all. I was like, oh, enough of
yeah,
this. But then of course it sucks you back in.
yes, yes, it does. Yeah, so there were two examples of the whole "it's not real" thing that are so profoundly ridiculous to me now, but made sense at the time. And this will give you a sense, anyone who's listening, of how insidious this stuff is. So our grandmother died, our mother's mother, when I was 15. You were 25. And that was the first death I had experienced. So it was a big
Mhm.
deal. Like that was a
Big
very
deal.
profound moment in my life, as it is for most people, I think, when you first experience death.
Yeah,
And I was super broken up about it because we just adored our grandmother.
we loved her.
Yeah. And I just remember our mother saying, you know, she's not really dead. This didn't really happen. It's not real. And I remember like sort of popping into that mindset and having this momentary comfort of like, oh yeah, you know, that's true. And like kind of feeling better for half a second, as you do, but then realizing, oh, but I don't ever get to see her again.
Right.
Like she's gone. We're never going to have Christmas at her house or talk to her on the phone. Or so even if you're
So
saying she's not really dead, it's like, well, she's still gone though.
yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
So
Yeah.
that doesn't really help. It doesn't
Yeah.
actually make me feel better.
Yeah. I don't remember her saying that. I probably wasn't with you when you were talking with her,
Yeah.
but I remember her being dead. I
Yes.
guess I'm sure because I was not really studying CS at the time. I definitely had a span there where I wasn't into it. So that I think that was part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's gone and it's awful.
Yeah. I mean, that's it, you know.
Yeah.
So then the second thing was when I moved to California, and just shy of a year. In fact, I think it was almost exactly a year now that I think of it, of when I moved here, the Northridge earthquake hit.
Mm.
And it was pretty intense for me. The building I was in went off the foundation. We had to like run out in a panic and sort of go back a week later and try to get our things out of, you know, I mean, it was kind of life-changing, and had to move
Yeah.
and all this stuff. And of course, you know, once I'm safe, the next day I call our mother, who's freaking out. And again, she says, you know, it didn't really happen. And I remember at that point thinking,
So dumb.
yeah, but I have to deal with all of this shit. Like I have to find somewhere to live. I have to go clean out the unplugged refrigerator with all its rotting food that's halfway across the kitchen. So like even then it was sort of being stripped away of like, yeah, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean anything, you know? That
And I
doesn't
can't actually
translate to
picture her
language.
saying that. Even in her CS brain, you would think that she would say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry about that earthquake." I don't know why, but you
Yeah,
know,
well,
sometimes she had these moments of
she would have
clarity.
moments of
Yeah,
clarity, yes.
yeah,
And she definitely had moments of doing normal mother
she
things
did. Yeah,
and being comforting. I'm not going to try to say she was like this cold bitch. That's not true. But always the CS thought would kick in of like, oh no, I can't say I'm sorry that happened, because that's admitting it's real, you know?
yeah.
So I guess this is a good point to fast forward to
The breakup.
the breakup of the mother
Intense.
and the religion.
Intense. Yeah.
So so we're talking early 2000s. I had this slow pulling away. And there were three sort of cultural things that happened in the early 2000s that really sort of jettisoned me out of the Christian Science boat, the ever shrinking,
Yeah,
slowly sinking Christian Science boat.
yeah.
The first thing was I was always a big fan of the podcast This American Life. And they had a segment on which took a part of Julia Sweeney's one woman show, Letting Go of God.
Yes.
And I heard this little snippet on the show and I was like, oh my God, what is this? I need to find it. And it's her story of sort of just losing faith and the journey it took her from starting off with, oh, I want to double down and really get into my Catholicism and really be a good Catholic and really study. And then just everything unraveling at that point. So that was one thing. The other thing was the documentary Religulous.
Oh yeah.
Bill Maher's
Brilliant.
Religulous, which I
Love it.
rewatched recently. I can't remember the third thing right now. All right, let's say those are the two things. So those are things that
It
happened
was
around
probably
that
some
time.
fabulous book or something that you read.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it was the God Gene. It was the article in the Time magazine, the God Gene, where I
Right.
realized that believing in a higher power is in fact like a neurological process
That's right.
that human brains do. This is something that we all do and have done for
Yep, we're
millions
all
of
wired.
years. We're all wired for this. And I remember that was the first thing that happened. And I was like, God damn it. So like none of this is just magical. It's all just like chemicals. Like what the hell? And I remember being so angry.
Yeah.
I'm just being manipulated by chemicals. Like this isn't even a real thing.
How old were you?
Telling me. I was probably like early 30s.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, like late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah.
And again, like my pulling away had been slow. Like I hadn't been to church in probably a decade. You know, I long since stopped doing any like practicing, but I still didn't go to doctors. I still didn't take pain pills because I was just at that point afraid of the unknown. And again, I didn't have major illnesses. I didn't have accidents. I didn't have a reason to go until I wanted to get on birth control. That was the reason I started going to doctors. I had to.
Had to.
A choice. So, so what happened with our mother was, there was this bizarre, series of events where just a bunch of bad things happened to me all at once. Like my purse was stolen, my car was smashed, completely totaled when it was just on the street. And then there was some other like crappy thing that happened like all at once, like in 1 week. And as was my wont, I would, Skype with our mother who's living in Brazil at the time. And, you still go for that acknowledgement, even if you never get it, which is so depressing to me.
Talk about the slot machine analogy.
Which I had a therapist who described this thing that we do, and certainly children do with their parents, where it's sort of like a slot machine where if you even get like a taste of acknowledgement or sympathy or comfort once, it's enough to keep you going, to keep trying and trying and trying. Even if 100 tries after that, you get nothing, you're still like trying to get that back to that moment of, oh, she actually reacted. She actually said, I'm sorry that happened. She actually.
Such a good analogy.
Yeah. And that was our whole life with her. But so we're Skyping and I tell her about these things that happened. And she goes off into the CSBS, as we like to call it, where you must not be doing your protective work, because you've been exposed to this like knowledge. It means that, there are these forces that are after you. And I forget if I told her in person on Skype or if I emailed her, but I finally said the words, I have to tell you, I just really don't believe in this anymore. And it's something I've been putting off doing for several years because I sensed that the minute I really said it plainly, she would find a way to cut me out of her life. Like I just instinctively knew that the second I challenged her and or told the truth about what I really thought about this, that she would find a way to just never speak to me again. And sure enough, I think it was just a few days later, she sent me an email. I was due to go visit her in Brazil for Christmas. I had like 3 weeks. I'd gotten my visa. I'd bought the tickets. Everything was ready to go. She sent me an email saying, I've made a decision for my own well-being, and I have to protect my health now. and your attitude about Christian Science is so toxic that I feel like to be in your presence would be really dangerous for me and my health. I think she even intimated that it would like kill her if I was around her because I was so negative. So I'm going to have to cancel our trip and not have you come visit. And, you know, I just have to look out for myself now.
Mm.
And
There are no words,
pretty much
really.
immediately wrote back, I am so sick of you choosing this religion over me. I can't take it anymore. You will never hear from me again.
Yeah. Yep.
And then side note, so this all happens around Thanksgiving, right? And a couple of weeks go by and I'm sort of feeling like I need to fix this somehow, you know, like I don't really feel like I want to never speak to her again.
Mm.
And so I'm like this close to just writing her, hey, can we work this out? Can we find a way? Like, I understand I'm not coming to visit you, but we've got to like find a way to fix this.
Right.
But I didn't write anything. And instead, I think it was like on Christmas Eve, she sends me an email just completely lashing out at me.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, this is where you come into it.
Oh, all right. It's a trio. I get it.
Where it was all Madeleine and I have been talking about this, and we've decided that you're an emotional blackmailer. You've always been like this, even when you were a little kid, that you're this and you're that, and just sort of like assassinating my character completely out of left field. And I'd like to point out too that this was not the relationship that we all had ever.
No.
Like, as
No.
much as, yes, our mother was probably a narcissist, she was very troubled. We didn't have like an abusive relationship with her. She was
No.
always kind to us. You know
Yes.
what I mean?
Yes.
Like, she may have stamped down our feelings, but it was never done cruelly.
No, that's true. And she always allowed us to follow our paths and our dreams and our
Yeah.
jobs. She was really good about that. However,
I want
Yeah.
to really emphasize that her doing something like this was so completely out of left field and something we
Yeah.
had never experienced. Like, she never played us against each other ever, ever, ever.
No.
You know,
Yeah.
she never attacked us. She never, you know, put us down. I mean, just this was just completely out of left field.
Yeah.
It was incredibly hurtful, but at the same time, I knew it was all bullshit. I knew something was just going on with her. And I had a friend at the time that read it and was like, you know, I think your mother's having a psychotic break.
Yeah. Well, at that point, remember, she was alone in Rio and sick.
Yeah.
And I think that really the illness just sort of took over. It just
Yeah.
took over. It became who she was. And it was just, she lived in this bubble and lost her mind.
Yeah, she really did. She lost all touch with reality at that point.
She did. Yeah.
And this was in 2006. So this was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So do you want to tell us how it was for you while all of this craziness?
Oh my God. Well, when she told me that you had broken up with her, we'll call it that, because
That's how it feels, yeah.
the split, whatever it was. Inside, I was like, yes, she did it. But I was also terrified because I realized that's it. She's free and I got to take this on. And I knew that I was in for it. Because by then also she was so manipulative with me and we were so codependent, you know. I guess being the eldest and being parentified and all that stuff just got worse and worse, and it got mixed up in this CS toxic mess.
Toxic cloud, as it were. Yeah.
That's right. So I sort of became her, even though she was in Rio, but then she came back to New York. I remember that. In any case, whether she was there or in New York, I was I was everything. I was her all other than CS, you know. I gave her money and I took care of her, and it all became so much. And I yearned to be in your position, you know, because of course, all along I was having doubts about CS too, for sure. Always, I think we all were always. In fact, I would say that all CSers have doubts because it's so hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I remember her talking to me about you and saying that you were just whiny and you were a bad daughter and, you know, just all these really hurtful things. And I think that's right around the time she wrote that email to you, right? I don't know how many years later it was that I was finally able to, when did you leave? 2008?
It was 2 years. So this all happened at the end of 2006.
2006.
And then
Okay.
there was this terrible period, 2007 and 8, where she just really like glommed onto you.
She did, yeah. And I hardly saw you at all. In fact, I remember I was gonna come out and visit and she talked me out of going.
Yeah.
Because for the same reasons, you were toxic
I
and
was toxic.
hurt. But I believed her. I
Oh
believed
yeah.
her.
Yeah.
Just so hard.
Well,
So
I
hard.
remember going to your house. I think I visited once for like some holiday and seeing like sentinels lying around. And I remember being like really annoyed.
Yeah.
You know, like I
Yeah.
wanted to say, I can't believe you're still reading this shit.
Right.
You know,
Right. Right. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I knew that we were in this terrible place of she had completely controlled you at that point.
Completely.
And it was just a question of if you were going to be able to free yourself or not. And I just had to make peace with the fact that you may never be free of her, even after she died.
After she's gone. That's right.
I kind of had to go, okay,
Yeah.
like this is where we're at. And
Yeah.
and I've certainly heard enough stories of people standing on the outside of cults wanting to help the people who are in it. And really, everybody says the best thing you can do is just be there. Don't try to talk them out of it. Don't try to argue with them.
Yep, you never did.
Just be present and let them do what they need to do, and so that they have a safe place to come when they do decide it's over.
Yep.
So tell us how it ended for you.
Let's talk about the over.
A moment, yes.
Again, it was steps towards that. It's never sort of one thing. But when she decided to move to New York, that was so difficult because, of course, I had to go to Rio and help her pack and go through all of that. And by then she was weak and we'll never know what happened to her. But, there was something going on there. So she didn't have a lot of energy and we had to pack up. And somehow I got all of her stuff into a couple of suitcases and we flew back to New York. And then she lived with us for a while. And honestly, it was just all about her and never about anything else. And by then it really didn't even have a whole lot to do with CS anymore. It was just, you need to take care of me, right? So she lived in New York for a while and then realized that that wasn't right for her either. And then she moved back to Connecticut and lived with our aunt and uncle. Do you remember that?
I forgot about that, but
yeah.
Yeah.
And all she did was complain about them not being helpful, and it's really hard. It's like, really hard. And by then I really was so fed up with all of it. And I could see that she was no longer the mother that I knew, like all, So the final straw was Columbus Day weekend, 2018.
2008.
Sorry, 2008. And she was living in Boston in Beacon Hill. And she asked me to come for a visit, and I did. And it was just more of the same. What can you do for me? And I'm so sick and I need to pray. And it's not about the disease anymore. It's about me trying to figure out how, it's just, oh my goodness. And when I left that weekend, I just made the decision that I was going to write her a letter, because there was no way I was going to have a conversation with her on the phone. And I was going to write her a letter similar to what you wrote. I just
can't do it anymore.
I'm dying inside. I can't do it anymore. I'm your daughter.
Wasn't there a moment where you were in church or something and she was like sitting there shaking?
Yep. Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, at the church in Boston. We were at I think a testimony meeting or something, and she was shaking, and it was just, and I was so done. It was just, oh, just awful. So yeah, so I came back from Boston that weekend and wrote her the letter, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but basically, I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't believe this, and I can't watch you be like this anymore, and I need my freedom.
Mm.
Um, and I got the lashing out letter in return. You're a terrible daughter, and on and on. Yeah. And
And how
then,
did you feel about the letter? Like, did you internalize any of it, or did you just go, no,
oh yeah, because it's still your mom, and you don't want to hear all those hateful words. It was really hard.
hard?
But
Yeah.
then I called you. Do you remember our phone call? Remember our phone call? I called you and I said, I'm done. And you said, I can't remember. I said a couple things about her, and you said she will never change. Just simple words, but they hit me deep. And I believed every word, I really believed it. And that was it. And we did have a few chats over Skype because she was in Rio, after that, here and there, but nothing very deep. I just really just to check in on her and see if she was still around,
Yeah. Would
but
she
that,
talk to you about Christian Science at all, or would she just like not even mention it
no,
at that point? Yeah.
I made it very clear to her that I was so done. I told her about all my wonderful doctors, and yeah, I really rubbed it in because I
Oh,
really wanted
interesting.
her to know that it was done. Oh, so let me go back just a little bit. So my first doctor's visit, yeah, so making that leap and saying you were done, it is harder than you think. I don't have to tell you. I remember the day I was living up in the Bronx and I walked outside and I was walking down the street, and it was really scary to me because I thought, I don't have that protective thing anymore around me. And I could get hit by a bus, or I could drop dead on the street, or, if there's no God, then how will I be safe? Right.
Yeah.
And of course, the answer is you're not safe. And that's sort of the beauty of it all, is that this is it,
Yeah. There's a term for that too, which is one of my favorite things I've learned, is that these groups instill phobias.
Mm,
So they all fill you with these fears of what will happen to you if you try to leave.
mm,
And it's all the same thing of like, you won't be safe. You won't,
right,
something terrible is just going to come out of the blue and happen.
right.
Like in groups like Nexium, which are sort of more self-help groups, they would tell you, well, you're just never going to deal with your shit. You're just going to be like flipping burgers. Like, you're never going to be anybody. Like, there's anything wrong with flipping burgers. I hate that. I hate it when people use that. But like, there's always this sense of, if you leave the group, bad things will happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I had the same exact thing a little earlier than you, of this feeling of suddenly this imaginary protective umbrella was gone.
He's gone. Yeah,
And
it felt like
I
cliff
was,
diving or something for me. Just
yeah,
free
I was
fall.
very paranoid and convinced that terrible things were going to start happening, and I wasn't protected anymore. I wasn't safe anymore. But I would, like you did too, I kept telling myself, you were never safe.
You were never safe.
It was all
It's all
an illusion. The safety was an illusion, yeah.
I know. If anything, you're safer now because you're seeing therapy, you're doing stuff to better your life, and right?
Yeah.
Take care of your body.
You're getting mammograms. You're safer than you were before. Trust me.
So the first thing I did after I talked to you was I took everything that was CS related in the house, almost, and threw it out in the rain. Literally, I waited for a rainy day so no one else could, so it would all be spoiled. So that felt really good. I kept two things. I kept my Sunday school lesson books because I loved my teacher at the time, Mary Wilson. She was lovely. And this amazing cookie jar, like one of those old vintage piggy cookie jars that she also gave me. So both of those things were from her. And the camp beads. You were talking about that the other day, the camp beads. So I kept those three things. But then when I moved to Florida, I looked at those lesson books and it filled me with rage, and I ripped them up and threw those out too. So I have nothing now. It's all gone, except the cookie jar and the camp beads. So that happened. That felt really, really good. And then going to the doctor for the first time was both terrifying and completely comforting, all at the same time. And luckily, there was nothing seriously wrong. I had like a mild infection, but everything else was fine, which is miraculous at 39 years old or whatever I was. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember you first going to doctors, and I feel like you found very compassionate,
Amazing.
understanding doctors.
Yeah. Because I told
Which
them,
is
because
great.
they're going to ask,
Yeah.
why don't you have any medical history? And
Yeah.
I told them, yeah, they were really lovely. And to this day, I'm a big doctor fan. I know that they have their faults, but I enjoy my trips to the doctor.
Yeah. I mean, I've had
Weird.
mostly good experiences too. My first, other than going to get birth control, my first real foray into the medical world was having the babies,
Oh,
you know. And when I gave birth to
right.
my first son when I was 39, you know, the first thing they ask you is, well, do you need any boosters? Like, what's your vaccination deal? And I was like,
Yeah,
okay,
let's talk.
so basically I was raised by wolves. I actually used that terminology. I was like, okay, I was raised by wolves. So I haven't had any vaccines. I know I need to get them. And I just said to the doctor, I was like, I'm really scared. So can you just tell me, like, you know, what, if there's any side effects I should look out for, if there's any like danger signs, if I get this vaccine and something happens, like, just talk to me like I'm 5. Just tell me
Right.
what I need to do. Cause I know,
Yeah.
I know I need to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm just really scared.
Yeah, of course.
You know, and they were great. I mean, I'm sure they see shit like this all the time.
Yeah, I'm sure.
You
There's a lot
know,
of, yeah. Yeah.
so my first vaccines were all when I had Bobby.
Right.
And I remember thinking when they put the first little tiny needle in, I was like, that's it. This whole time I've been terrified of needles and vaccines. And it was like a pinch.
A pinch.
Like, are you
Barely.
kidding me?
Yeah. I
I just
know.
gave birth, for Christ's sake, you know. That's it.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Big
So
fan of the
luckily,
doctors.
I've had good doctors too. And I know, you know, the state of healthcare in the United States is a total mess.
It's a mess.
And definitely there are people in Christian Science that if they had gotten medical care would have died anyway, would have suffered anyway. But I think it's safe to say that a lot would not have, probably including our mother.
Yeah. Who died alone in her apartment.
Yeah.
With
Shall
nobody
we
Yeah.
tell that horrendous story?
Can you tell it?
I can tell it. So our mother started to get sick. I'm going to guess when she was around my age. So like early 50s, I remember
think.
her starting to get really weak and having these like episodes of pain, and just things were just not right with her physically. You know, she'd always been a very like robust person, and that just, and I didn't know if it was like a menopause thing. I don't know if it was an aging thing, but there was definitely, again, she would always sort of talk about her bladder. I'm having this like bladder issue and it's really painful. And, you know, it just kind of went on over years. And I remember there were several times where she said, you know, I was at death's door last night. And I mean, she would really fill us with this terror of,
Yeah.
oh my God, she's going to die. And I think that's part of the reason I mean, of many reasons, I decided to just completely cut things off and distance myself, because I wasn't just going to stand by and watch her die.
Right.
We knew she was going to end like this. We knew it. I mean, it was inevitable, you know? So we're talking over 15 years probably of this sort of decline.
At least.
You know?
At least. Yeah.
So getting into the 2010s, you know, you were having sporadic contact with her, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was too, because I'd had these 2 children, and I did feel like she should know about them. So I would send her things, and we kind of had this little very rare interaction, this rapport that was nice, you know, it was fine.
Mm-hmm.
But then around 2018, she was very active online. She had these online communities because she was completely isolated. She didn't leave her apartment. She didn't work other than just on the computer. So she had a lot of things that were going against her mental health, like constant chronic illness, isolation, having us alienated from her, which I'm sure did something to her. Certainly, she is human after all.
Right.
And there was a point at which I think both you and I started getting messages from strange people saying, you don't know me, but I'm an online friend of your mother and she hasn't been online for a while and we're starting to get really worried.
Yep, that's how I found, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And so I remember throughout, like, it was like June of 2018. I remember having this feeling of like, okay, like this is the thing I've feared for decades at this point, that it's finally happening, you know? And then I remember that morning I had my phone under my pillow and it was probably 7 or 8 in the morning. The phone rang and I knew what it was.
Yep.
Because nobody calls at that hour.
That's right.
And you said, Hill, they found her. You know?
Yeah. I got a call after the Facebook people got in touch with me. Thank goodness for online stuff, right? Thank goodness. They got in touch with me, and I think my husband called the consulate. In fact, I know he did because his Portuguese was better. Called them and asked them to get in contact with the building and see what was going on. And that's when, they sent the firemen or the police or whatever, and they found her. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was the autopsy was inconclusive because she had been there for we don't know how long.
Yeah.
It's goddamn sad.
Yeah.
Just when I say it over in my head, it's just so. I mean, I know we lived it, but it's unbelievable.
Yeah. And that, I think that was the first thing you and I would always say to each other was, I cannot believe that it came to this.
Yeah.
And
yet it knew it would.
And yet this is how it ended. Like, this was how her life ended and this is how her story ended. And I cannot believe, after all the good times we had, that this is it. This is how it happened.
Yeah.
And it was because she didn't seek out medical treatment. Would she have lived had she? We'll never know. We'll never know the answer to that. I mean, our theory pretty much, I think, is that, this probably started with a UTI of some kind, where she had pain, urinating, like people do. I've had them, no big deal.
Yeah.
Get antibiotics and it's gone.
Yeah. Magic.
And it probably progressed to, shutting down her kidneys and cancer. Because
I think cancer for sure at some point, because there is quite a bit of cancer in the family. So
because you went down there and you got her computer.
I did.
And found some things. Right.
Well, her diary was there, so there was a lot in there about her and us and all that. And not all negative towards us either. I think I might have sent you some excerpts where she really felt remorse about what happened, which was nice. But yeah, there was a recording that still makes me rage inside. She recorded a conversation with her practitioner at the time, saying that she was too weak to get up. She couldn't get food or water. And her practitioner said, "We'll have you disco dancing in no time at all," and gave her some stupid thing to read. And that was it. And I was so angry. I sent a long letter to the board of directors at the church, and also to him. In fact, I think I called him. In fact, I know I called him, which was
you were on a tear.
I was so angry.
Like you were ready to burn it all down. Yeah.
Yeah. But I needed that to, I kind of knew it would never happen, but it felt really good. Yeah, I did call him and we had a conversation. Yeah. I
remember there were angry emails and how can we sue people? How can we bring this all down? And I'm sure, again,
this was the process. I needed to do it.
Yeah. I mean, this is a terribly common experience, and something that I'm sure we'll talk about a lot on this podcast is people having to, helplessly watch their parents die of medical neglect. I also call it religious suicide. And having to just stand by and watch this happen and not be able to do anything about it is it's maddening. I mean, I
Yeah.
think I've shut all of that off because I just can't let myself go there
Yeah,
because
it
it's
is. It's
so
really,
awful and so ridiculous.
you can't do a class action because they're protected by whatever. I don't even know, but it's just
Yeah.
something should be done. Anyway.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. And again, like we'll never know if she might have been saved, if our relationships could have been saved. We'll never have the answers to these questions.
Mm-mm.
But I personally feel like if she hadn't been, eschewing medical care all these years, she would have been seeing doctors.
Oh, for sure. I think she probably would have been fine,
Yeah.
knock out that UTI and you're done. And it's such a shame because she had glimmers of this is all bullshit, remember?
Yeah.
Many.
Yeah.
But couldn't quite get the deal done.
Couldn't quite extricate herself. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think again, like this religion just really appeals to people that need to have this sense of control, even if it's just an illusion, because it is an illusion, but the illusion is so powerful and comforting. I remember, that's certainly been an issue for me in my life with my anxiety and whatever else, OCD and stuff like that, is you crave anything that makes you feel powerful and in control.
Yeah, for sure.
But I remember at a certain point, I was just like, well, I don't want to be comforted by something that's bullshit.
Yeah.
Time. It's like you just can't. You can't like this fantasy that people don't actually die. It's like it's a nice fantasy for half a second, but it's not real.
It's meaningless.
Yeah. So it's meaningless. It's better to just go, hey, it sucks that death happens. It's the worst.
I actually, when I first left, other than being terrified that there was no God, at the same time, I also felt incredibly free.
Yeah.
Right. Knowing that this is all there is. Enjoy it. It's beautiful. Crazy times.
I had the same thing.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
After the fear portion, came this incredible freedom of just, this is what you get. Enjoy it while you're here. Make the most of it. Connect with people. Be human.
Yeah.
Human things that bring joy, like listening to music and dancing and swimming in the ocean and
and being able to just live fully and honestly with the people you love, like our family. I mean, you have this wonderful husband and sons, and you can, there isn't any kind of crap. There are no walls. There's nothing. And I'm a flaming atheist married to a Catholic, and it works beautifully. Why? I have no fucking idea why, but it does. So, it's great.
Yeah, I remember once when you were in that period where you were still, in that mindset. I remember once you saying to me, well, if I didn't believe everything happened for a reason, I just wouldn't want to live anymore, or something like that. It was this thing of like, I have to believe that everything happens for a reason and there's a design to everything. And I remember I used to think that too, so it wasn't, I didn't feel the need to talk you out of that. I was just like, I felt that way too for most of my life, that everything was designed, everything was in a certain direction. And I think one of the things that got me out of that mindset was when I was, a young girl and first started learning about and studying the Holocaust. There are some things that are just so terrible that you just cannot justify it. You can't think, well, there's a reason that happened. It was because of that, it had to happen because it's like, no. No. It happened because people can be horrible.
That's right.
That's why it happened.
Hideous things.
The hideous, horrendous things happen, and
that's right.
This was one of them. And so there's a tremendous freedom in giving up this need to explain everything, this need to find a reason for everything. I was especially interested in my various studies, aka listening to podcasts, to see how many other groups have that same, this happened to you because you did something. Like in Scientology, they call bringing it in. Like, how did you bring this in to yourself? And little Scientologist children, are brought up with that belief system of that you made this illness happen or this accident happen because of some other thing, even for them, like another lifetime, you did something that made this happen.
Ugh,
Sort of like a
exhausting.
karmic
Yeah.
concept, and being free of that is just so magical.
It's magical.
I mean, it's been a long time for me now. I remember when I would still feel guilt about getting sick or something happening, be like, oh, I must have, done something. I must have thought something negative about somebody, and then this thing happened. So for a while, it took a while to like unravel that.
Unravel that. Yeah, I get that.
But I think I can honestly say that's completely gone now. I mean, it's probably been
same.
7 or 8 years since I really even had those thoughts,
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I definitely want people to get from this podcast is that, time is actually the greatest healer.
It is.
Yeah. These things, I see people in our ex-Christian Scientist Facebook group who are new and are really struggling. And I'm like, oh my God, I remember being there. I was there. Just in this terrible place of questioning yourself and thinking you're crazy and thinking you're making a mistake by leaving. And, I told you that when I was having those thoughts of like, maybe I'm wrong, maybe Christian Science is the real deal, I would go read the child cases chapter.
That's right.
In, what is it, God's Perfect Child?
Yes, it is. Carolyn Fraser. Thank you.
I would always go back and read the child cases of all these children that died because of Christian Science and how it happened and how the parents were manipulated. And I would be like, okay, I was right.
Just need a reminder.
Thank you. Need a little reminder.
Yeah, the books are so helpful. All those great books. That's what got me through. Yeah. And you, of course. Yeah. So did you, when I was still in, did you think that I would ever be able to get out? I know you hoped, but yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know. I definitely went through a mourning period of feeling like I had lost my whole family. Because I actually didn't. I mean, the cousins were still there. I would still speak to her.
But it was weird because it
was weird. It was weird. And I definitely felt like, okay, in order to get through this, I think you need to just accept that these relationships are probably never going to really be what you want them to be, and or just may not really happen anymore. And this is kind of an odd analogy, but I remember telling myself, now you know how millions of gay people have felt when their families turned on them for living their truth.
There you go.
This is how they felt. And now you know how it feels to be shunned, basically, for just being real.
Yep, you were shunned. You were shunned by both of us. And I've apologized before, but
of course.
How many times I felt so awful after, just so awful. But
well, I mean, and my response to that is, of course, I accept the apology. And I know that you weren't in your right mind.
No.
And I give people a lot of grace for just being manipulated and being in a situation where they do things they wouldn't normally do. I mean, I've been there. Anyone in a cult has been there.
That's right. And your brain changes.
Yes.
For the good and the bad.
Yeah, I did a lot of brain rebuilding.
Yes.
After Christian Science, which I've told you about. I wish I could find this series. It was something that I think I got through Netflix when they were sending DVDs. It was called This Emotional Brain.
Oh, yes.
Series about how our brains actually work.
Yeah, I loved that.
And it taught me a lot about consciously like rewiring your brain away from depression and anxiety, to the point where I can honestly say, like, the panic attacks that completely ruled my life when I was younger are just gone completely at this point. Because I've learned tools of how to like get ahead of them and stop them before they start. And it's not to say that I don't have anxious times or times where I'm feeling kind of low or depressed, but it used to be like, life used to be like this for me. Now it's kind of just,
because
you
know what it is and you know how to.
You have tools.
Yeah.
These tools that we were never given, because guess what? Denial is not a tool.
No, it's not. Yeah.
We thought it was. We thought the ultimate way to live a negativity-free life is just to deny all negative things.
God, it's so ridiculous. exhausting.
Many groups feel this way. Christian Science is not alone. It was not the first. It won't be the last.
No. Well, I'd like it to be the last, but
Yeah.
no.
And people buy into it because they want those negative feelings to go away. Nobody wants to have negative experiences or negative feelings.
Yeah.
But we've learned the hard way that just flat denial and turning away from it is not effective.
Yeah.
It gives you OCD and anxiety.
That's
and
right.
depression,
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, I
And that heart problem that I referenced, of course, ended up being just hideous chronic anxiety, which I still deal with, I have to say, but it's okay. It's better. I know what it is.
Yeah. And it's a work in progress,
right?
I mean, it took years for me to really get on top of this stuff. It was a long process. Yeah.
And it's an anxious world anyway,
Yeah.
there's a lot.
The world hasn't been a great place for the past, ever, but especially like the last few years have been extremely stressful. So
it's a lot.
Yeah. But being given tools, I mean, that's another thing about watching young children grow up. I'm so proud of how schools have changed since we were kids, how teachers have changed. I mean, at least here in Los Angeles, there's so much emphasis on, they call it SEL, social emotional learning.
Oh, nice.
Where kids are really taught, and I don't know how super effective this is. I'm sure people will say it's crap and whatever, but I feel like children are allowed to have feelings now, and they're allowed to be neurodivergent, which is another thing that didn't exist when we were kids and certainly wouldn't have existed in Christian Science. I mean, I had terrible OCD. I had trichotillomania, as you know. I pulled all my eyelashes out for years when I was in junior high school, and it like tormented my life and was horrendous. And it's not to say that I wouldn't have that today if I were a kid, because I'm definitely wired for that. But I think I would have been given tools.
Sure.
And it wouldn't have just been go pray about it.
That's right. At least you've gotten a hug from mom.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, today people understand. People understand being on the spectrum. They understand what ADHD is, what ADD is.
Yeah.
What OCD is for kids. I mean, I had tons of suicidal ideation from the time I was 7 years old. Because when you grow up in a mindset of none of this matters, none of this is real, then none of it matters.
Right.
There's nothing to be here for. And I'm just so glad I stuck around, because I had no idea how good life would get.
Yes. And the only other point I'd make is that I'm still in touch with 2 or 3 Christian Scientists, just because they're, old friends or whatever, But I think that it's changed because they all go to doctors. I don't know. I'm curious, but I'd like to be a fly on the wall and, what's going on there, because doctors.
I think it's changed too. And again, I'm not really in touch with anybody, but I definitely feel like the claws have been retracted. I found this fascinating Guardian article where they talked about something that I didn't hear of because this was after my time, but apparently in 2010, the main church basically disavowed radical reliance.
I didn't know.
It was like a real thing that they said,
that's interesting.
We're not doing this anymore. This is no longer part.
Okay. Because it doesn't work.
Because it doesn't work. And I know that during COVID, I specifically looked to see like what Christian Scientists were saying about the vaccines, and the church put out a statement saying we encourage our members to follow local health guidelines. So I think it probably has changed in that respect of allowing medical care, which makes me happy for the people still in it, because at least they'll be safe from medical neglect. But it kind of pisses me off too, because it's like, well, it's not Christian Science then.
Right. Yeah.
Then what is it?
I'm calling it that. Yeah.
That is certainly not what Mrs. Eddy wanted.
Oh, that lunatic.
Yeah. So there's part of me that's like, well, it's not Christian Science. If it's just like God is love and then
whatever.
then it's some other thing.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
what are you
just
doing?
generic and yeah, which means it's dying, which is great.
Yeah, which is, it's all good. I mean, we want it to just collapse like a flan in a cupboard, you know? And I believe that's happening by generation as people leave, as there aren't any more
Yes.
converts. You know, it's sort of like the Shakers. The
Yeah,
Shakers went away because they weren't allowed to have sex.
right, right, yeah,
They're all celibate.
that's right.
So
Which
there
is
were
a
no
little bit of a
children to pass
problem.
it on to, and the whole thing just went away. It's like, all right,
That's
there you
it.
go.
Done and done. That's funny. Emoji shrug. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I what I would like to cover in these podcasts going forward is definitely just sort of sharing that sense of, you know, I think we all grew up with this incredible sense of guilt and responsibility and frustration too. I remember being very frustrated a lot as a
Yeah,
kid, like a
yeah,
lot of anger and frustration because I was being taught things that didn't make sense,
that's right.
you
And
know,
didn't work.
and didn't work.
Yeah,
And the
didn't work.
constant struggle and
Yeah,
cognitive dissonance, as they call it, of, you know, trying to make this thing work. And then you would have these little things happen that you thought were real, these little healings. And that was the slot machine thing of like,
and
but
that's the
it
slot
worked
machine.
that one time, it was amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I think,
Or you would pick up a journal and read about the testimonies, right? And
yeah,
some of them were really compelling.
very compelling.
But
Yeah.
it's all either made up or
Yeah. I mean, that
I don't know.
was one of the most heartbreaking conversations I ever had with our mother when we were fine. There's this book, 100 Years of Christian Science Healing,
Mhm.
which I
Yeah.
still have.
Burn it.
I
No.
did keep a few books just because, for archival purposes. And I loved that book. I mean, I've read it cover to cover countless times, and it always
Mhm.
gave me tremendous comfort.
Mm.
And I remember our mother talking about it, and I remember her saying, I mean, all those stories, all those healings, they can't all be bullshit. They can't, can they? And I remember both of us just kind of, yeah, they
Wow.
can't, can they? They have to be real, right?
Oh,
All
wow.
these stories, all these thousands of testimonies, like they can't all be. And it's like,
Yeah,
actually, they can.
they can. You can, I think a lot of things you can talk yourself into the healing, right? And then write it down, and there's no way to check it. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
There's so many ways that these testimonies can be false. And they're not all people just making them up maliciously.
no,
I don't think that happens,
no.
or happens extremely rarely. I
Yeah,
think it's more, yeah, people wanting to believe something, people not understanding how bodies heal themselves,
that's right.
people misdiagnosing things themselves, because God knows they never go to a doctor and get told that that's what this is. They assume it's something because they don't
Right,
understand it, but
right.
it's not that thing. It's this other benign thing that does go away, you know?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is embellishment and,
Yep.
you know, false memory. And I mean, I've learned so much about how our memories are just so not reliable.
Mhm.
You know, that eyewitness testimonies in court are profoundly not reliable.
Yeah. So
And
interesting.
we think we're so sure that it happened a certain way, but it didn't.
It didn't. Yeah.
You know, so I think, yes, it is entirely possible that all of these testimonies are either coincidences,
Yep.
embellishments, misremembered,
Yep.
misdiagnoses,
Yep.
you know, or these rare occurrences of a physical ailment just sort of going away.
Mhm.
You know, even when it looked really, really bad, it just kind of goes away for whatever reason. That
Mhm.
happens. I mean, the body is still a mystery,
It is.
you
It
know.
is. Absolutely.
So
Wow.
yeah, these testimonies that are meant to keep people in and keep people invested.
Yeah. That's what
I
they're
mean,
there for.
yeah, and I've heard enough people in our group, especially, you know, talk about when they were younger, when they were children, making up testimonies to please their parents. You know, I can't say that I did that. I definitely believe the ones that I did give, but I can see how easy it would be to be, you know, if that's the only way your parent ever approves of you or gives you any love is when you stand up in church and say you've been healed, then
Yep.
why not do it, you
And
know?
I never gave a testimony, so there you go.
Yeah. And I gave lots. I loved it. I love
Yeah.
public speaking. So
I know you do. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had a blast giving
I
testimony.
never had anything to testify about, you
Yeah.
know. There's
I mean,
the
I
first
didn't really either, obviously. Oh, I got over a cold after a week. Like, woohoo.
my parakeet is better. So
Yeah, my
cute.
parakeet got better. Yes.
Adorable.
Yeah. And then we had the little old lady rolling the stone away.
Oh dear.
Those
Those
little
people.
eccentric
Yeah.
old ladies, all in their, all in their disease, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd like to end every
Yeah.
podcast. I mean, we've kind of gone over these things, but
Okay.
ask 2 questions of everybody who comes on here. Because
Okay.
these are things that I'm not 100% clear on. Would you call Christian Science a cult?
Yes. Not in location, but in your head for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would too.
You're just separate from anything that's real. Mhm.
Yeah, it definitely meets the bite model of Dr. Stephen Hassan, who's one of my favorite
Yes.
anti-cult activists. Was a
Yeah.
wonderful podcast called The Influence Continuum that I listened to. And he made up this bite model. So it's when a group controls your behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions.
There you go.
It's a cult. And I think it's pretty clear that Christian Science does all of those things.
It checks every box,
Every box,
twice. Yeah.
And then the second question is, do you think Mary Baker Eddy was a shyster or a true believer?
I think she was insane. So does that make her a true believer? I mean, I think she was certifiable, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that means she's not a shyster.
Yeah, like I don't think she set this up intentionally to defraud people. I do think she believed it.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. There are some people that have information. I don't know if you've
Oh,
seen this.
I'd like to read some of that.
People that really like get into the history, and there are people that are like,
oh wow,
of the mindset that this was like a setup.
The setup. Well, she did take medicine and so on. So there's that. Yeah, interesting.
So that's why I want to ask this question, because I'm curious, just for
for sure.
Like, how much of this was a very delusional, narcissistic woman creating this movement because she really wanted to help people, or how much of it was intended to just make her a wealthy.
Interesting.
Donor.
Very interesting.
I don't know. I don't know the answer.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
I'd like to read the inside scoop though.
Me too. I want to know. I want to know what information people have. So,
well, and maybe in future episodes, people, spill the tea, as it were.
Give some dirt. Dirt. All right. Well, this has been delightful.
Right?
Yeah. We told our story and our mother's tragic story, and she's certainly not alone in that. I think we're going to hear a lot of
them.
Untimely parental or relative deaths, and that's just.
It's just awful.
Just awful. But but we're good. We're thriving.
I know, we're alive and healthy, so that's amazing.
We're taking care of our health. We're going to doctors. And more importantly, we're free. We're free thinkers.
Yeah.
That to me is more important than anything else. We're able to look at something skeptically. We're able to change our minds.
Yeah.
If something stops making sense.
I can get up in the morning and have a cup of coffee and watch the news and not have to read that ridiculous lesson ever again.
Yep. No more lesson marking. No more.
Oh, God, I dreaded that.
Getting up and going to church. I asked my boys once, like, can you imagine what it'd be like if every Sunday I dragged you guys out of bed early and made you put on nice clothes? And they looked at me like I was crazy. What? Why would you do that? Like,
why would you?
My childhood.
Yeah, amazing. Love it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll sign off now.
Okay.
Hopefully I'll have more guests telling their Christian Science stories.
I can't wait.
Soon.
Yeah.
And thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
All right, Hill. See ya.
Thanks for listening to Leaving Christian Science. Disclaimer, I'm not an expert, I'm not a historian, I'm not a therapist, I'm just an ordinary, imperfect human who had the misfortune of being born into Christian Science. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and do not necessarily represent those of the host. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional, medical, legal, or psychiatric advice.